Good morning. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be with all of you today. I really miss being in person with federal civil servants because I know you're struggling to do your job and accomplish your agency's mission during these incredibly difficult times when, since March, the world was turned upside down, and you might have been able to get used to a world turned upside down, but then what happened, it just got turned sideways and then sideways again, and then right side and upside down once more. So everything is changing all the time, and uncertainty is very, very debilitating. And all of that, of course, is compounded by the stressful environments, both work-wise and for many who are working at home, family-wise, that you're currently facing. And I also know that there are some of you who have had friends and or relatives who've been affected by COVID and some who have died. So there's grief everywhere. But I invite you for the next 1.5 hours to come to the key oasis, the key executive leadership program oasis, where the water is free and the love is unconditional. It's a place where hopefully you can, that you can get some new focus and some new energy. So we're going to be discussing what questions a person who holds no formal leadership position or a person who currently holds a leadership position might ask that person they see in the mirror to evaluate whether that person should apply for a promotion. So just for my edification and for yours as well, I want to do a poll number 1, to ask you where you are. So which of the following applies to you? I hold no formal leadership position, but serve as a leader. I'm considering or have considered applying for a formal position. Check what applies to you and we'll see what comes up. All right. So most of you have considering or have considered applying for a higher leadership position, which means you hold one now, but others not. So hopefully all of you in every category will start thinking in a way that's a little bit different than the way you think now. So I want to start with a definition of leadership, and it's the art of motivating a group of people to act toward achieving a common goal without the use of coercion. I love this picture because it shows a connection, sort of a mind meld, ideas going from each person to the other. So the fact of the matter is leadership can be exercised with no formal leadership positions, in an informal leader position as a team leader, or in a formal leadership position. Now, in a formal leadership position, I have coercive tools. I can use it in the context of evaluation. I can use it in the context of threatening discharge, but I can also say that those coercive tools do not motivate people to work harder and more creatively and more energetically. So the challenge for a leader at every level is to devise individual and collective actions and strategies that motivate those they lead to act collectively toward a common goal. Now that's the challenge. So I believe the largest opportunity for impact and the largest personal accountability occurs when I seek and I'm selected to a formal leadership position. And when I say, please select me, I'm taking on a responsibility and accountability to the organization and to those I lead. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to get a little whiteboard going here. And if you could answer this question, what is the responsibility of a what is the responsibility of a formal leader to the led, to those that person leads? What do you think that responsibility is?
And for everyone, if you are participating in the whiteboard, the way that you access it is if you go to the top, you should see you're viewing Robert Tobias' screen, and then view options. You click on view options and then click on annotate. And that way you will be able to write on the screen.
Thank you, Bree. Trust, integrity, teach, honesty, motivate, support, envision, humility, listen, vision, provide vision, empowerment, moral, coach, accountability. I love these. I love these. Transparency, honesty. You know, sometimes I think people somebody says to them, you know, you ought to apply for that position, and if you do, you'll probably get selected. And they do, without thought. And yet what you're saying on this whiteboard is, if I get selected, I have responsibilities that to those I lead, which I have to consider before I put my hand up. Because if I'm not interested in doing the things you're describing on this whiteboard, I don't believe I should be raising my hand. Thank you very much for these. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. So one other thing that I'd like to just talk briefly about is the oath of office. Now, the oath of office is what distinguishes a federal employee from the private sector. You take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. But what I want to take a look at is, I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I enter. And I suggest that it's impossible to well and faithfully discharge the duties of a leader office unless you know what those duties and responsibilities are before you apply for that position. So if you're going to fulfill your oath of office, it requires acquiring knowledge of what you're promising to do. So what are the factors that you might consider to determine whether you wish to apply for a formal leadership position, a promotion to the next level, or remain in a non-formal leadership position? Take a minute, please, just for yourself, and write down those factors. Identify the factors that you have in your mind now that you would consider. Now, at the end, we're going to come back to this slide, and you can update it, you can alter it or amend it. But right now, what I'd like you to do is write down for yourself what factors that you would consider whether you would wish to apply.
But Bob, while they do that, a question just came in. It says, where does the oath of office come from?
The oath of office comes from a statute that Congress enacted, and they require that every federal employee take that oath of office. when they start, and then often when they're promoted once again. But it's a statutory responsibility. So here's our path for this morning. And it's really a series of questions that you might ask yourself when you're considering whether to apply for promotion. Am I willing to redefine my success in my job as a leader from I to we? Am I willing to strive to give up being the best technical expert in the room? Am I willing to strive to create a work environment where those I lead give me their discretionary energy to accomplish my goals and objectives? Am I willing to strive to empower those I lead to influence me? We normally think of empowerment in giving delegated responsibility to someone. I want to focus a little bit different. Am I willing to strive to empower those I lead to influence me? Am I willing to spend my time creating trust between those I lead and me, between and among those I lead and between me and my bosses? And finally, am I willing to develop my capacity to increase my authenticity? So that's our path today. And we're going to start with, am I willing to redefine my success as a leader from I to we? So in a non-formal leader position, I'm evaluated on how well I perform. I know what that feels like. I've been successful, but I really don't know what we feels like. But what I do know is if I'm an informal leader, I have to, if I'm a formal leader, I have to depend on others to achieve my goals and objectives. My goals and objectives are far too large for me to achieve all by myself, so I have to depend on others. I have to interrelate with others. Am I willing to spend the time setting goals, monitoring behavior, solving the problems of others? In short, working with others instead of myself, relying on others instead of myself to achieve my goals and objectives? Am I willing to spend time and energy to create the relationships with those I lead in order to be successful as a leader? Now, the problem is that many of those who raise their hand and say, yeah, when they seek selection, that I will spend time doing those things. When they get selected, they forget the promise and continue to think of themselves as an individual performer, and often try to do the work of everybody they're trying to lead. So I'm going to move to the board again. And here's the question I'd like you to answer. What part of your behavior would be most difficult for you to change if you were to choose to redefine success from I to we? What part of your behavior would be most difficult for you to change if you were to choose to redefine success from I to we? Getting things done fast, not projecting my standards, making fast decisions, interacting more with people who are not very smart, delegation, trusting others, having all the information, not getting it done, control, patience, control. I don't know that I can read that. Lead.
It looks like it says feedback.
Oh, feedback. Yes, it does. It certainly does. Thank you. Feedback. Missing deadlines. Willingness to let others take the lead when they're more knowledgeable. Accountability. Results. I assume the person who wrote results means relying on others for results. Right, relying on others for results. Well, it seems that one of the central themes here is control. I have control over myself, but I don't have control over others. I have to motivate others. I have to influence others. And the question is, can I do that? Will they respond? You know, I remember when for the first time, I was leading a group, and my greatest fear is that I'd be running down the path and look back and there would be no followers. It'd just be me running all by myself. So this idea of relying on we is a very, very challenging idea, a very challenging idea. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. Am I willing to strive to give up being the best technical expert in the room? You know, many non-formal leaders or team leaders achieve prominence in the workplace because of their technical expertise. They are the go-to persons. If I have a question, I'm going to go to that person and get the answer. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know a response to the technical questions, and you go to that person. Now, it's that prominence, that acceptance that often leads those persons to be selected for formal leadership positions. The irony is that the research shows that those people who are chosen primarily for their technical expertise are those most likely to fail as leaders. And the reason they fail is that they're unwilling to give up being the smartest person in the room. So why don't they want to give it up? That's very simple. I don't want to give it up because it's what got me here. I can depend on that. Moving into this we stuff is something I can't depend on. I don't know about it. What does that really mean? It feels good. I love being respected for my knowledge. And if I'm so busy being an expert, I don't have to face doing the leader task because it goes to the bottom of my to-do list. And after all, there's no one who's really prepared to do this technical role, so I'm going to continue to do it. And also, since I'm the most technically competent, I have to micromanage everybody else's work to ensure it gets done and gets done right. So one thing about thinking about giving up being the smartest person in the room is you don't really have to give up the knowledge that you have. The question is, are you willing to live with people who over time have more technical competence than you because you are spending time leading and they are spending time increasing their technical competence? So let me tell you a little story about me. back in the mists of time when I was the general counsel for the National Treasury Employees Union, I had a case that I won administratively. I won in the Court of Appeals, and then the government appealed it to the Supreme Court. And so I filed all the briefs in February before I ran for office to be president of the union in August. And so I got myself elected and I came back, and the case was scheduled to be argued I came back in September. It was scheduled to be argued in October. I think the second week in October. And all of the books I'm preparing for arguing in the Supreme Court say, well, you know, it takes about 6 weeks to get ready, of intense preparation to get ready to argue. So I had a choice to make. Do I argue the case, or do I select the newly appointed general counsel of the union to argue the case? Now, the newly appointed general counsel, you know, I'd worked with her all along the way, but I knew more about the case because it was my case. I also knew more about the law because I'd been around a long time. I'd read all the cases. I was at the time teaching federal sector labor law at GW University, so I knew the law. So the question was, should I allow her to argue the case? Now the plus for arguing the case is I knew it. I knew it. I knew the law. I knew the case. The other plus was I was fearful that if I allowed Lois to argue the case and she lost, I would be blamed for not arguing the case. And the third plus was I had a very, very active litigating career, but I was smart enough to recognize that getting elected president mean that would end, and I would not have an opportunity to fulfill my dream of arguing in the Supreme Court. So this is my one last shot. And the minus is that if I did not allow Lois to argue the case, it might show that I didn't respect her expertise. So what I'd like to do is a poll. And the question is, do you believe the new NTU General Counsel should be permitted to argue the case? Yes or no? What is this? All you hard-hearted folks, you don't want to let me argue this case in the Supreme Court, even though it's my last time, you hard-hearted folks? I guess the answer is yes, by a large margin. So, you know, here's what I did. I knew early when I started this decision-making process that intellectually Lois should be allowed to argue the case for the obvious reasons. But I could not call her into my office and say, Lois, it's your case. I couldn't do it. So I asked myself, I wonder why you can't do that. What's going on? And what came up for me was I started to realize that I was at the height of my technical expertise in federal sector labor law. And I had defined myself, I defined my success. I ran for office using that expertise, and now I would not be able to maintain it. I would no longer be one of the few with the scope of knowledge that I had at that time, and that it was all downhill hereafter. So I gained that intellectual understanding, but I couldn't pick up the phone until I took the final step. And the final step for me was, am I willing to feel the pain? Am I willing to grieve the loss of my technical expertise? Am I willing to feel it? Am I willing to live with it? And when I did that, I was able to pick up the phone and say, Lois, it's your case. I'll be there, I'll do the moot courts, but it's your case. So I don't think I'm unusual. I think almost every new job, every new promotion requires giving up something of the past to make room for the future. And if I don't pay attention to that, if I don't grieve that loss, if I don't experience that loss, it seeps in under the rug and affects the way I behave. I don't delegate the way I should. I don't develop others the way I should. If I'm not comfortable relying on we instead of I, if I'm not comfortable giving up what I did best in the past because I'm looking forward to a future that's different. So, grieve the loss. So I'd like to do another poll around this issue. What would you be able to allow others to be more technically proficient than you? Would you be able to allow others to be more technically proficient than you as you assume a leadership position?
And Bob, while they're filling out the poll, we did have a question come in. Could Lois have served as co-counsel?
Yes, but only one person gets to argue. Who signs the brief as co-counsel is irrelevant. It's, in this case, it was who argues the case. Would that be me or would it be Lois? The Supreme Court doesn't allow you to split the allocated time. So somebody had to be chosen to argue the case. Look at this. 100% yes. Terrific. That's terrific. Because if you're not willing to do that, maybe you shouldn't raise your hand. So, am I willing to strive to create a work environment where those I lead give me their discretionary energy? Now, discretionary energy means the energy that you choose to give to a leader, to a boss, that's over and beyond, it's beyond what might be expected because you're excited, you're engaged, and you want to do this work. It's discretionary energy. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to think of a boss for whom you gave discretionary energy, and what behavior did that boss exhibit? What behavior did that boss exhibit that led you to be willing to give your discretionary energy? So I'm going to call up that old whiteboard again. So what was the behavior that boss exhibited, as specific as possible, the behavior that boss exhibited that led you to give your discretionary energy to that boss? Trust. Empowered me to take risks. Appreciation. Freedom. Relatability. Engagement. Believed and supported me. Independence. let me do my thing. He was a leader with admirable qualities that I wanted to do my best for. Listened. Long runway. Now, if you look at that list, technical expertise isn't listed. It's not listed. The behaviors you identify are not technical expertise. They're not intellectual. They're heart connections. They're heart connections. Those bosses connected with their head and their heart. And that's what led you to give your discretionary energy. So if you're considering being a boss, the question is, are you willing to do the kinds of behaviors that are on this board that create an environment where those you lead are willing to give their discretionary energy to you, So I'd like to do a poll. Were you surprised the most critical component of creating discretionary energy was soft skills? So most no, but there were some yeses. Most no, but there were some yeses. And it's not surprising because if you think in terms of technical skills being critically necessary, then you're surprised. Am I willing to strive to empower those I lead to influence me? Now, as I suggested, since coercive power and coercive actions may provide compliance, they don't provide motivation. So here's my assumption, and this is sort of a critical assumption here. I believe that I, as the leader, have a better chance of influencing you to do something if I am available to you to be influenced. So if I'm available to you to be influenced, I have a better chance of influencing you. Now, if that's correct, I also assume that it takes initially, for sure, some courage for those I lead to attempt to influence me, their boss. So I'm going to call up that whiteboard one more time here. And I ask you to, if you agree with my assumption that it takes courage, why is it so? Why does it take courage for the person I lead to try to influence me? What's that courage about? Why is that so? Why is my assumption so? Or if you disagree, why you disagree? Intimidation, possible intimidation. Fear of rejection. That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Authority, vulnerability. You don't have all the answers. You have to be willing to relinquish pride to allow someone to influence you. The courage to be vulnerable, ego, unwilling. If I'm the follower and I say, this is the way, boss, I might be wrong. I don't have any corner on the knowledge market. fear of stepping into their power. Whoever wrote that, what does that mean? Fear of stepping into their power. It might mean that I'm not sure that I have it, and that if I step into it, it might disappear. But I'm not sure about that. Screwed up organizational norms, that's certainly a potential problem.
Bob, the person who wrote fear of stepping to their power just wrote in chat that to clarify, they are afraid of their own leadership abilities.
Afraid of their own leadership abilities. Right. I don't have the confidence yet to articulate what I believe to be the case. So it may be easy to say, yes, I want to empower those I lead by allowing them to influence me, but what does that really mean? What is the behavior that I would have to change to create an environment where those I lead would be willing to seek to influence me? So I have a little thing I want to show you here. Now, do I have courageous? Are you seeing courageous followers?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay. So take a look at these questions. There are 5 of them. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to look at these questions and ask you to identify the behavior that would be the most challenging for you to change. Do you really want courageous followers? Do I really want to hear criticism? Do I invite creative challenge? Do I encourage team accountability? What is the message my number 2 is sending? Is it consistent with my message? What would be the most difficult for you if you were to adopt the idea that I want others to influence me? Okay, if you could put up that poll, please, Bree. All right, which of the following number questions would be hardest for you to accept? Well, it looks like the one that's the most challenge by far is number 2. Do I invite creative challenge? I think it's hard for most of us, particularly when we're more often right than wrong, legitimately, to hear someone who challenge us and we discover that we are, in fact, wrong. And to say, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. So it makes sense to me that that would be a very difficult, that would be behavior that would be very difficult to change. And so when considering if I'm going to apply for a promotion, am I willing to struggle to change that behavior? Is a question that 20 of you would certainly have to face. Thank you very much. All right. Back to the slides here. Trust. Am I willing to spend my time creating trust, which I believe is the lubricant that's necessary for organizational success? Leaders have to discover how to invite those they lead into a co-created trustworthy space so they can support each other as they work together. So achieving collaboration requires a genuine, trustworthy community. So a leader interested in the led showing up with courage to speak their truth has a responsibility to create and hold a safe container where relationship trust can occur and courage is generated. So a leader's role, I think, is to nurture trustworthy conditions and be willing to take part as a learner, one who does not know all the answers. Now, some leaders to build a container necessary for courage to emerge. Some are simple, some are more complex. And the first is, how often do you come to a meeting called by a leader and the leader sits at the head of the table and as people come in is fooling around with their iPhone, does not acknowledge anyone as they come in. And all of the people in the room fool with their iPhones. So there's no attempt to create a community before the actual meeting begins. What a difference it would make if everyone felt comfortable with the other by receiving a warm welcome. Modeling presence. You know, it's so easy to be distracted, especially easy on Zoom, right? You get the message that's come in that you have an email message and you can call it up and you can look at it. And so you're doing double duty and you're not listening to either thing. So do I model presence and paying attention? Do I extend an invitation to participate to those I'm seeking to lead, or do I demand participation? Do I speak my truth in a way that respects others' truth? Do I create an environment where it's either or do I create a conversation about curiosity about differences, as opposed to only taking a position that supports my position? Well, if I'm curious about your position, then you're encouraged to articulate your position as opposed to defend your position. If we refrain from trying to fix each other and use I statements, this is what I believe, it helps us not fall into judging others. When the going gets tough, turn to wonder. And by that I mean, do I wonder about your reaction to what I'm saying, as opposed to assuming I know what it is? And I immediately start to think, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Do I wonder, what you have in mind? I wonder, what did I have in mind? Which allows our conversation to continue. And trust and learn from silence. We often get very anxious when a question is asked and there's no answer, so we fill it in with laughter. We fill it in with words, as opposed to allowing people just to sit with a question before they answer it. So these are some actions to build the opportunity for courage to emerge. Here are some leader actions that model relational trust building. The first, of course, is respect. A recognition, if I'm the leader, that I am depending on you to help achieve my goals and objectives. And if I can respect that, if I can value that, if I can value you and you feel valued, you feel respected. Do I have a personal regard for you? Am I, as the more powerful person, do I make a conscious commitment to relieve uncertainty and unease that you might feel? Do I attempt to make a personal connection with you? And do I make an attempt to help you develop professionally? And when I talk about competence, I'm not referencing performance competence, but rather a leader's willingness to create, model, and facilitate compliance with a set of co-created group norms. So if I have that competence to, first of all, create a set of group norms and ensure that people follow them, I can not only have relationship trust, but reliability-based trust as well. And integrity. The ability of followers to make sense of their work together in terms of what they understand, they are doing, and should be doing to accomplish the goals and to accomplish my goals and objectives. Okay. So now, am I willing to strive to be authentic? Now, why is it important for a leader to be authentic? And the simple answer is this. It takes you a nanosecond to determine whether a leader is authentic. And the extent to which you believe that leader is not being authentic is the extent to which you start running away. And if I need you to be engaged with me to accomplish my goals and objectives and you're running away, I have no chance of achieving my goals and objectives. So behaving authentically is critically important for success as a leader. So Peter Northouse, in his book, Leadership, talks about authenticity, and he defines it as making a choice to first better understand who I am, a commitment to self-awareness, and second, a commitment to who I am intellectually and emotionally, a commitment to relational transparency. So a commitment to self-awareness and a commitment to relational transparency. And what I think Northouse is saying is that we have to have a commitment to develop an understanding of ourselves that extends beyond what we currently know about ourselves. And I also believe that it is a lifelong commitment because the world is changing and we are changing in it. So are we constantly trying to better understand ourselves and better understand and become more relationally transparent? So the question is, how do I do that? How do I become more authentic? And the first answer is, what is self-awareness? What does that mean? So Norquist defines it as referring to the personal insights of the leader. It's not an end in itself, but a process in which individual understands themselves, including their strengths and weaknesses, the impact they have on others, and the impact they have on others. Self-awareness includes reflecting on your purpose, core values, identity, emotions, motives, goals, and coming to grips with who you really are at the deepest level. Now, when leaders know themselves and have a clear sense of who they are and what they stand for, they have a strong anchor for their decisions and actions. So how do we do this? How do we unlock this? So first thing you might do is be aware of your work purpose. And it answers the question, why do you do the work that you do? What is your work purpose? Why do you do the work that you do? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes about what your purpose is. And then I'm going to do a little poll. Is your work purpose consistent with applying for a promotion? And here's what I mean by that. So for example, imagine yourself as a bench scientist at the Department of Agriculture, and you conduct experiments as part of a larger project to develop a non-toxic killer of a plant-eating bug. So your focus, your professional focus, is on the wings of that bug. That's it. The wings of the bug. Not the bug itself, but the wings of the bug. Now, because of your research, this basic research, other scientists have used your research in their research. So you've received a lot of acclaim for your bug wing research. But now, promotion opportunity comes that you could be the head of the lab, which means you wouldn't have the wings, but you'd have the whole bug. What should you do? So I suggest the decision in part is how you define your purpose. If it is limited to your work in the lab and the wings of the bug, you don't apply. If it is to have a larger purpose, that is success of the entire project, you apply. So different people come to different conclusions. So define your purpose, and is your work purpose consistent with applying for promotion? And then, Bree, if you could put up the poll, when people conclude their work, they can answer the poll. Thank you. I use that example because when we did our first SES CDP program for the Department of Agriculture, there was in fact a bench scientist who was selected into the SES CDP program, and midway through came to me and said, well, Bob, I've decided that I really don't want to become a member of the SES. I really want to continue my work as a bench scientist. And so he went to the folks at agriculture and said, I want to withdraw from this program. I don't want to be selected into the SES. And at first, they were incredibly angry to me. They wanted to ask me to come and explain myself. And so I said, isn't it better for someone to learn that they don't want to be a leader before they actually become a leader, rather than after they become a leader and fail? Well, then they got it. And I said, I recommend that you leave this person in the program because it provides skills for how to create the relationships between that bench scientist and others who might use his research. So I got off the hot seat. But this is a very, very important issue to identify whether the position for which you're applying is consistent with your purpose. So how do I increase my authenticity? And that raises the question of, am I operating with my values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations that I've consciously chosen, or VABEs I have unconsciously adopted? Our behavior is driven by our VABEs, and originally we develop our VABEs based on what we learn from our parents, what they say we ought do, what we learn from our family, who say what we ought do, what's right, what's wrong. And as we grow up, the childhood lessons that we learn and the society cultures in which we live, we don't think about them. They are just who we are. However, just who we are has an impact on who we become. And the reason is that we process about 40 impressions per second, but we experience about 11 million impressions in a day. So we see, and our brain processes many more we see and experience many more things than we experience as impressions. So how does our brain differentiate what to process and what not to process?
Bob, sorry to interrupt, but we have a couple of people wanting to clarify what does VABE stand for.
Values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations. Values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations. Thank you, Bree. It's an important basic part of this assumption, of this discussion. So our brain excludes stuff that are inconsistent with our values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations. So my brain is making those automatic and, to me, unconscious decisions about what I process. Increasing my self-awareness, simply put, is making those unconscious decisions conscious. If they are conscious, I can make a choice to change my mind. If they are unconscious, I keep making the same decision over and over again. So here's a very, very simple example of me moving from unconscious to conscious decision making. So I grew up in the Midwest in the 60s, where fresh fish were unavailable. They were frozen or they were fish sticks. And fresh fish weren't served because they weren't available or they smelled bad. I was served a lot of fish sticks in my friends who were Catholics on Fridays. So I ate them with a lot of ketchup on Fridays with my friends. But if anybody asked me if I liked fish, I said no. So I moved to the East Coast, DC, Washington, DC, to go to GW Law School. And a friend there said, let's go to this fish place for dinner. And I said, no, I don't like fish. Do they have steak? He said, yes. So we go to the fish place. And of course, the server came with a plate full of fresh fish. My friend ordered snapper, and I ordered my traditional sirloin with baked potatoes, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't really listen to the waiter. I just ordered my sirloin. I had filtered out what he was saying about those fresh fish and automatically rejected the offer. Now, I could have said to myself, why don't I like fresh fish? But I didn't. My response was so deeply embedded in the synapses of my brain that my response was automatic and unconscious. Fortunately, I had a dinner partner who was curious and asked me, so why? Why didn't I like those fresh fish? And I told him. Now, of course, he immediately pointed out the difference between the Midwest and the East Coast that I had not heard. So I tasted his fresh fish and was amazed at how good it was. My self-awareness increased because I was able to pause, reflect because of his question, and discover my own false assumption and beliefs because someone had challenged them, and more importantly, I had heard that challenge. Of course, then when I found out that they were tasty, I had to unlearn what was automatic and relearn a new response, something that is hard for all of us. But because I opened the door to eating fresh fish, my brain processes expanded and I became interested in pollution in the bay and the history of the Chesapeake Bay, a whole new world that had always been there and available to me was now accessible to me. Now, the reverse could have happened. I tasted the fresh fish and hated the taste. That result, however, would also have moved the unconscious automatic behavior to conscious. I would have conducted an experiment and decided consciously that I didn't like fresh fish. So it was my own value, assumption, belief, and expectation, not something that I had unknowingly acquired. So a leader's challenge is to move more of the unconscious, reactive behavior to conscious behavior. The more we challenge our own vabes or allow others to challenge our vabes, the better we get at expanding our box. It proves to be like a muscle that we can strengthen the more we exercise it, giving us greater power to choose as my self-awareness increases. When we take the time to stop, reflect, and make a conscious choice, we increase our self-awareness. So what additional actions might I take to increase my self-awareness? I can take the time to discover what my emotional triggers are. In other words, when I'm going around the Beltway and someone cuts me off and I flip the bird automatically, that's an emotional trigger. Someone cuts me off, stimulus response. What caused that response? Decision-making biases that I might have. Do I have excessive optimism? Do I have overconfidence? Do I succumb to groupthink? Do I have a status quo bias? We all have a lot of biases. Do I challenge myself to understand my biases to increase my self-awareness? Can I value not knowing? Can I truly value not knowing? Can I sit with uncertainty, or do I have to immediately have a solution? Do I update my life story when I learn new things about myself? Do I take the time to update my life story? Do I have people who are truth tellers to me? Because oftentimes I really think I'm making it with somebody, and then that we have this great relationship, and they're thinking I'm a slug. But they don't tell me, so I don't know. So I keep behaving the same way. They keep thinking I'm more of a slug. I think I'm doing just great. So I have a group of people who say, hey, Bob, that person thinks you're a slug. Stop it. Do I take the time to confront my inner critic? I'm not good enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't drive the right car, and so forth. Do I take time to think, well, where did that start? And is it useful to me now to increase my self-awareness? And finally, do I identify my grudges? Because when I have a grudge against someone or something, it's an automatic response as opposed to a conscious response. So we're going to do a little poll here. Which of the 7 challenges would be the most difficult for you to achieve? Would be the most difficult for you to address? Which of those 7? Well, for each of you who identified one of the challenges, as the most difficult. That's it. That's what has to be addressed. But the one that troubled most of you was confronting my inner critic. And it is indeed difficult to deal with my inner critic because it saps my confidence, it impedes me developing who I am. So confronting my inner critic requires me to ask myself, where did that come from? What does it feel like? Acknowledge that feeling, sort of like I had to do with grieving the loss. And repeat as many times as is necessary to discover that the inner critic probably, when it occurred originally, made some sense, but makes no sense for you now. So by experiencing the emotion, it frees you up to think intellectually about whether or not it's relevant now. Thank you. Exhibit a commitment to relational transparency. So the first element of authenticity is increasing self-awareness. The second element is authenticity, or is exhibiting relational transparency. Now, if a piece of a person is masked or hidden and unavailable, you sense it. So what do? You fill in the void. You make up a story for that perspective. Now, my wife is a writer. And when she and I go to a restaurant, she can point to someone across the room and based on clothing, age, appearance, and how animated the unheard conversation is, spin out a wonderful story that may be true, but most likely is not. And the reason it is not, it is because it's made up totally of her imagination. Now, that's what people do about you if you are masked. They make up a story, they fill in the blanks, they create a narrative based on their imagination, which may or may not be true. Now, if you unmask and tell us about yourselves, then no one has to make up a story. So, for example, when someone is normally pleasant and today is cranky, we make up a story about why it is so. Perhaps that person was stuck on the beltway, maybe trouble at home with a kid or a spouse, trouble with a boss, etc. We don't know, but we create our own narrative. If that person were to tell us why they are cranky, we wouldn't have to speculate. To do that, however, that person would have to be vulnerable. The boss would have to reveal something that may be personal or embarrassing or painful. Now, Brene Brown, who has written about the need for vulnerability and has done a great TED Talk titled Vulnerability, states that, quote, vulnerability and authenticity lie at the root of human connection. She says, we are wired to read each other's expressions in a very nuanced way. This process is called resonance, and it is so automatic and rapid that it happens below our awareness. So when someone is authentic and vulnerable, they are trustworthy. And that shows up in our brains in areas related to positive emotion and social connection. When we exhibit vulnerability, we are seen as a human being, someone who is approachable. For example, I read a recent article about CEOs asking for advice. And only 1/3 actually received advice, even though they asked for it. And what the researchers found is that the 1/3 who received it we're perceived as trustworthy and the other's not. It's the same thing as when a boss says, I have an open door, but nobody comes in that door. They're not perceived as trustworthy. So the challenge for us is whether we have the courage to feel the emotion that might keep us from being vulnerable, pain or shame or embarrassment, pause, instead of an automatic response to mask up, make a choice to be relationally transparent. Am I willing to practice to unlearn my old mask up habit and relearn to be transparent? Brene Brown says that those who choose vulnerability and transparency, quote, believe what makes them vulnerable makes them beautiful. I say what makes them vulnerable makes them human to those they lead. Having said all of that, one of the reasons people in the workplace do not unmask is because it is unwise. The information would be used to mock, tease, or seek to undermine, so it isn't done. But leaders have a chance to create a set of norms with those they lead where relational transparency is the norm. All would have to accept that norm and the boss would have to model it. So in the case of the cranky boss, I think it would be an incredible difference for that boss to say, I want to let you know I'm feeling cranky today because I just learned my wife has stage 3 pancreatic cancer. So some leader actions that model development of the authentic self. I need your help. How am I doing? And be willing to receive an honest answer. My spouse just tested positive for cancer. What other feelings have you had that, if expressed, would have created a greater connection between you and others? Oops, forgot to clear. There you go, got a clean whiteboard. What other feelings have you had that, if expressed, would have created a greater connection between you and another person or group? Contentment. Contentment. I'm contented. I have confidence. I have trust. Similar likes and or dislikes. An understanding of work from home parenting struggles. Partnership. I don't know. Awareness. So the issue here is, what is going on in me that if I communicated it would require me to be vulnerable, so I don't do it. It's a very important question to think about. And as I say, sometimes it's unwise. Sometimes it's very unwise to be vulnerable. It has to be safe. So I believe a leader has to decide whether they are going to take the responsibility to create group norms where vulnerability is accepted behavior and model that behavior. So let's go back to the slides. So what criteria might I use to hold myself accountable as a successful leader? These are the things that we've been talking about, 1 through 7. So if you could bring up the poll, Bree. What would be the most difficult for you? What would be the most difficult for you? Is that the last poll or this one, Bree? Okay, good. Which of the 7 challenges would be the most difficult for you to achieve? Perfect. So the most difficult was 6. Am I consciously identifying my vibes? I think that is, for me, that's the most difficult for me too. It requires consciousness, it requires learning, it requires unlearning. However, as a leader, I think it might be the most important. All right. So I said we would return to this slide. What, I'm going to go to the whiteboard. What, if anything, has changed as you reflect on volunteering and accepting more leadership responsibility? What changed from when we started to where we are now, if anything? Greater appreciation for soft skills. What I should focus on, more awareness about leadership. Stepping up means being more extroverted and open. Better understanding the responsibilities of leadership, what one has to give up to meet those responsibilities, the importance of recognizing my unconscious faves, being vulnerable. It's okay to be vulnerable to those we lead. We generally want the same things. From a leader as we need to give as a leader. Ridding myself of unconscious biases. Leadership is putting self last. Terrific. This is terrific. Thank you very much for that. So let me conclude with some good news. Every single thing we discussed today is knowledge, insight, and understanding that can be learned. It can be learned. No matter our age, our synapses can unconnect and reconnect in new and different pathways, allowing us to constantly unlearn old behavior and learn new behavior. We can make the unconscious behavior conscious and learn to do it. We are not stuck with the learning that we have today. We can learn new ideas and we can chart new behaviors for ourselves. Now, one of the primary ways new learning occurs is through the questions we ask ourselves and the questions we hear and answer posed by others. I sincerely hope the questions we discuss will be of assistance as you chart your path forward. Thank you very much for being together today. I truly, truly appreciate it. Now, I notice we're at 1:26 and we're supposed to conclude at 1:30, but I am willing to hang around for a few minutes to answer any questions anybody might have. I wish you all well. I wish you all well. And again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Bob, for today's session. We've gotten a lot of comments throughout just saying that it's very timely, it's very relevant. Someone said they wish they got this training a couple of weeks ago and it would have made a difference for them. And just to answer everyone a few questions that have come in, this session is being recorded and it will be posted on Key's YouTube channel and on our website next Tuesday. And we'll be making an announcement via email and on our LinkedIn and Twitter accounts. So you can keep updated with the resources that we have available. But in the meantime, please continue to send in your questions. And if you want to speak directly to Bob, you can use the raise hand feature in the participants panel, and then someone from our team will unmute you, and then we can have a direct conversation. But right now, we don't really have any questions. Oh wait, one question did come in. Can you just repeat VABES, what that stands for?
Values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations.
Thank you. So it doesn't look like we have any outstanding questions or new questions coming in. So I think we can wrap it up here. Still getting a lot of thank yous, and today was a great presentation, very thought-provoking. So yeah, just a reminder, final reminder, this session is being recorded and it will be online next Tuesday for anyone who wants to review, along with a PDF of his slides, as well as the worksheet that we used today. But with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up.
Thank you again very much.
Right, thank you, everyone. And Bob, oh, somebody did just put in a question regarding Black Lives Matter and VABES. What challenges do you see there?
I think it goes really to the heart of what we've been discussing today. How do I become aware of automatic behavior that I need to challenge if I'm white? How do I become aware of that and acknowledge it and say, hey, wait a minute, this has been automatic with me. And now I don't want it to be automatic anymore. I want to take responsibility. I want to take accountability. I want to change my behavior. So I think this idea of understanding who we are, of increasing our self-awareness, is not only applicable to us as leaders, and if we want to be leaders, it's also applicable to every part of our life and the interrelationship and connections that we seek to have with others. So I think the Black Lives Matter provides us with a real opportunity to challenge ourselves about who we are and who we want to be.